Well, hello and welcome to Faith, Philosophy and Life with me, Mr. Shelton. It's great that you're back here again, and today we are thinking about a topic which I'm sure will affect a lot of us in our lifetime. We're going to be thinking about war, and war is something that I know that you might not have experienced firsthand, but you will know that our country has been in conflict with other countries within your lifetime. And even today, there are soldiers on the front line protecting our nation, protecting our nation's interest, and looking after others as well as peacekeepers. So what I'm going to do, as per usual, is I'm going to really important there that we think about that, not just at remembrance. So today we're going to be thinking about, is war ever actually acceptable, and what's the Christian view on that? So go and grab a pen and paper, because here's our cheesy intro music. Perfect. Well, welcome back. So our title today is Can War Ever Be Just? Can War Ever Be Just? And today we're going to explore if Aquinas' just war theory really can justify war. Okay, so it's going to be a good outcome if we can retell what the just war theory is using correct examples. It's going to be great if we can explain how the just war theory can help a Christian decide on when war is acceptable, and if even better, if we can evaluate the just war theory, actually seeing if it's in fact effective or not. So what we're going to do today is it's a bit of a bumper episode, to be honest with you. There's quite a bit I'm trying to pack in, and there's a lot more with just war theory that I could go into, so you will need to do some external reading as well. I'm going to ask you to watch a little clip from Saving Private Ryan in a moment. We've got some key terms, we've got some big issues, we've got some quotes from different theologians and church teachings, and then there's an essay for you to be working on as well. So as I say, there's a lot to pack in. We might not cover it all in an hour, so you might need to roll this across to another lesson or use this as additional time as well. So to start with then, I'm going to ask the question, is this justifiable? Now, I'm not able to link this clip due to copyright reasons within my clip, so I'm going to ask you to access the link at the bottom, which is http://tiny.cc/fpl-ryan. Okay, and that will take you to another clip on YouTube, so please do that in an alternative tab. I'll put the link in the description below as well, so you can click on it if you didn't want to type that. And while this is on, and it is quite bloody, it is something that I found very, very shocking the first time that I saw it, but it's something I think really worth looking at. It's based on the D-Day landings at Omaha Beach, where the Americans landed, and as the Brits did in Normandy on D-Day, and it's meant to be very, very realistic to what life was like. Steven Spielberg, when he was filming it, had in fact interviewed a lot of people that had been there at the time. So I'm going to ask you, while you're watching this, just to think of this question: is it justifiable? Is there anything that could in fact mean that what you see now is okay? So I'd invite you to have a look at that clip and then come back to me. Okay, so now hopefully you've done that and you've seen that clip, and I wonder what your emotions are when you see that. I certainly saw, when I saw that, I thought, what's going on? Is war ever acceptable? That amount of human suffering? And that's a question I ask every time I see that clip, and I think that's a really good question to ask. And maybe you're watching and you think, well, it's fine because people choose to do it. Well, they didn't then. They were conscripted. And there are people today that, okay, may not be facing that, but they are facing other things. So I will leave that with you to think about. There is no easy answer for it. Apart from, we do need to ask the question, and we do need to see what Christians might think about that, because that's not quite as clear cut as you might imagine. So to start with then, I'm going to ask you, what rules would we put in place to support war? What rules would we put in place to support war? So pause me now and try and come up with 5 rules you think that would be appropriate if we were in a war zone, that everyone, both ourselves and the opposition, the enemy, what rules do you think that we should put into place? Pause me now and get that done. Okay, so hopefully you've done that. So our next question then is, how can we justify the damage of World War II against one man? Now obviously I'm talking there about Hitler. If it wasn't for Hitler, World War II would probably not have happened, because it was Hitler that was the driving force within Germany. And I know that a lot of people did a lot of very evil things, and that was on both sides as well. But the question is that I'm asking you is, how can we justify the damage of World War II against one man? So again, pause me now and try and get maybe 2 or 3 lines written about a justifiable defence, if you indeed think there is one. Maybe you just need to come up with why it's not justifiable. So pause me now and do that. So hopefully now that's done. I've got some 3 key terms here I would like you to make a note of in your book. This is really important you get these down. There's jus ad bellum, forgive me, my Latin is not very good, which is conditions to cause a war. Jus in bello, which is conditions during a war. And jus post bellum, which is justice after war. Basically, Aquinas decided that there needed to be a structure that would allow war to take place. So he created a set of rules, which we are going to look at in a moment. And you do need to be aware of what these rules are. Not in the Latin, you'll be pleased to know. But you also need to be able to categorize them within those 3 areas. Okay, conditions to cause a war, conditions during a war, and justice after a war. So pause this now and get those written down, then come back to me and we're going to look at the just war theory that you may already be familiar with. Some of you may have covered it at GCSE. Okay, so what we've got here then is we've got the war must have a just cause, e.g. against an invasion or for self-defense, not to acquire wealth or power. So for example, in the first Gulf War in the 1990s, it was widely believed that despite the fact that Iraq had taken over Kuwait, that America led that effort because they wanted the oil reserves that Iraq had, and they wanted to protect Kuwait. So some would say that that was not a just cause. However, World War II, you could argue, was a just cause because it was against an invasion, or a potential invasion, should I say. So there's the first one. The second one is the war must be declared and controlled by a proper authority, e.g. a state or a ruler. So I couldn't just wake up one day and decide that I wanted to go and bomb a country, because I'm not a proper ruler. I'm not the authority. So the state needs to agree, which is why Parliament in the UK always has to vote on whether to go to war or not. Some of you may remember the Syria issue that was a few years back, where one party did want to go to war but the others did not, and actually the war did not take place, even though some argued there was really good grounds for it. So the war must be declared by and controlled by a proper authority. The war must be fought to promote good and avoid evil. Okay, so that's part of it. These are Aquinas' rules, with the aim of restoring peace and justice after the war is over. Okay, just post bellum there. So the purpose is to create peace and justice after the war. Okay, so that's a really important one there. The war must be a last resort when all peaceful solutions have been tried and failed. So you can't just enter a war on a whim. It needs to be a process that you get there for. The war should be fought with proportionality, with just enough force to achieve victory, and only against legitimate targets, e.g. civilians should be protected. So that's a really important one, which we'll come on to when we think about the Second World War and weapons of mass destruction next time. And then lastly, the good which is achieved by the war must be greater than the evil that led to the war. Okay, so you can't just do something if you feel that you want to do it because you're being evil. There's got to be a really good outcome for it. The other one that isn't on there that sometimes is mentioned is that you've got to have a good chance of winning. Okay, there's no point going in a battle if you don't stand a chance of winning. Better to be a slave and alive than to be a warrior and dead. However, if you've got a good chance of winning, then from a Christian viewpoint, better to give it a go anyway, because you're stopping an injustice. So what you now need to do is, when you've got those written down, just identify which would you say are jus ad bellum, jus in bello, and jus post bellum as well. So pause me now and let's get that done. Okay, so behind me then are some potential ways that you could do it. As you know, with this exam, it's all to do with how you could justify your views anyway. I think it's really important to know, and I'm sure a lot of you do this, know this already, that the just war theory, as I said, was developed by St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the most influential theologians that there's been in the last 1,000 years. The theory sets out some conclusions about how to judge whether a war is acceptable or not. But please note the age of this. When Aquinas was coming up with these rules, he wasn't talking about modern warfare. He was talking about warfare on horse and carriages. So some things that we might consider in terms of whether something's proportional, whether civilians will be harmed, was never an issue in his time, because people rode on horseback and they killed the opposition, the enemy, at the place they were having their battle. So I think it's really important that you are aware of that, and you've double checked now that you've got the jus ad bellum and jus in bello roughly in the right place as well. Okay, so what we said we'd do today is we'd explore if Aquinas' just war theory can really be justified. It'd be really good if we could retell what the just war theory is using correct terms. Great if we can explain how the just war theory can help a Christian decide on if war is acceptable or not, and that's what we're going to go on to start thinking about now. So here are just some images which I found, which I thought were really sort of telling. The first one is targeted fighting on the battlefield. Would that be acceptable within the just war theory? Yes or no, and why? Okay, for those of you who have got yes, that is absolutely correct. This is an image from the Vietnam War and from America and Vietnam. And this is very much that idea of targeted fighting. And if targeted fighting happens, then civilians are not, in theory, harmed. Okay, second one then. This is an image from the... this is an image from an Australian newspaper with regards to Britain declaring war. And this is how the press had it. So again, yes or no, would this fit the just war theory, and why? Yes, you're correct. It would fit the just war theory because it would be saying that it's declared by an appropriate authority. The nuclear bomb ending the Second World War but killing thousands of innocent people. Would this fit the just war theory, and why? Right, those of you that have said yes, I'm sorry, it doesn't. It's a no. This is one of the reasons why some people argue the Second World War, even though it fits so many of the criteria, does not fulfill the just war criteria, because the nuclear bombs and the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the damage was just too great. It affected more civilians than it did military, and it was indiscriminate. So, I'm going to give you some questions now to think about. Who decides what's just? What is a genuine political authority? When does something become the right intention? How do we know if a war is winnable? How do we know what is the last resort? How do we know that that's in fact the last thing that could ever be done? And with the issue of proportionality, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which was what the 2003 invasion was meant to find, they weren't there. After the country got invaded, after Saddam Hussein got deposed and put on trial, no one found any weapons of mass destruction, which was the reason for the war in the first place. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to get those down in your notes. You do need to know the counter-arguments against the just war theory. Maybe try and have a go at a few of them as well. Really stretch yourself. What do you think would be the answer to some of those questions? So pause me now and get that done. Okay, so what we've done then, we've looked at Saving Private Ryan, we've done our key terms, and we've looked at some of the big issues as well. Now, I do have one more thing I'd like to go through with you. This is something which is very dear to my heart. I was born and bred in a place called Coventry in the West Midlands, and Coventry got bombed in the Second World War massively. It became known as Coventраted. It was just destroyed utterly by incendiary bombs, which is where the Germans came across and they dropped bombs that were on fire. And they knew it was a medieval town. A lot of the city centre got destroyed because it had thatched roofs. And Coventry just became unrecognisable at that point. Now, I had relatives that lived during the Blitz that escaped and saw it from the hillsides around. And they described to me as I was a teenager growing up the total devastation that was caused. Coventry was a place where they made a lot of artillery, a lot of army equipment. So therefore it was essential to the Allied effort in fighting the Germans. And Coventry Cathedral got bombed as well, which is the image just above my head. That's the Church of England Cathedral that's in Coventry. The question then needs to get asked is, do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few? So was it acceptable for Coventry to get bombed even if they knew that it was going to happen? And there was a rumour that's gone round for many, many, many decades that the British government in fact did know that Coventry was going to get bombed because the Enigma machines that had been cracked at Bletchley Park, which you may have heard about, had been cracked prior to Coventry being bombed. And if the Allied forces had sent people and sent the RAF against the Luftwaffe at this point, it would have given the game away that we had in fact cracked the Enigma code. And if we had done that, then maybe many more lives would have been lost in the war effort, as Germany would have changed the way that they were doing things. Whether it's right or not, whether it in fact happened or not, I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. However, I have got this clip that I'd like you to watch, and I think it's really good at trying to show you some of the issues, because again, when you're thinking about war, the more examples that you can put in, the better that will be for your exam answers. So let's just watch this now.
On a night in November 1940, more than 500 German bombers brought utter devastation to the city of Coventry. It was an appalling attack, made worse by a scandalous rumour that's still circulating in the city to this day. Tonight, Coventry-born Pete Waterman investigates a claim that Churchill knew the attack was coming, but deliberately did nothing to save the city.
It may be 9 years ago to everybody else, but it could be yesterday to me. You were absolutely terrified, and you just wondered, will it ever stop?
The attack on Coventry was one of the most notorious bombing raids of the Second World War. It was so bad, it even gave birth to a new word, Coventраted, meaning the total destruction of a town. But what if it wasn't just a surprise attack by the enemy? What if, as it's been claimed, Winston Churchill knew about the bombing, but did nothing to stop it?
There's a big question mark over the role Churchill had to play in the affair.
People would like to know one way or the other, because as long as they don't, it's not confirmed, people will speculate.
But why would Churchill just stand by and allow a city to be bombed? The story goes that Churchill knew about the impending raid from intercepted German signals. He could have protected the city, but if he had, it would have told the Germans we'd cracked their codes. He was faced with a moral dilemma. He chose to sacrifice the city. At least that's how the story goes. The idea that Churchill put the secrecy of his intelligence source first has circulated here for decades. But is it fact or fiction? The secret source was called Ultra, and it came from Bletchley Park in Buckinghamshire. This is where some of Britain's best minds were breaking the Germans' famous Enigma codes. They were giving Churchill a steady stream of information about the enemy's war plans. So Simon, this is the famous German Enigma machine. How does it work?
You type the message into the keyboard, and through the electrical circuits within the machine, they're jumbled up, and a different letter comes up for each letter you type in on the light board.
Right, so if I press in Pete, which is P, that comes up as an E comes up as I, T comes up as Y, and E comes up now as O. How many combinations?
There are 158 million different combinations on this machine alone, which is why it's so difficult to break.
But break it they did, and in November 1940, Ultra's analysts intercepted a series of German messages about the bombing raid called Moonlight Sonata. But could they identify Coventry as its target? In the 1970s, a number of writers said they could.
Ultra gave Churchill and his advisers at least 48, possibly 60 hours warning of the devastating raid that was planned for Coventry.
But were colourful accounts like this any more than just figments of the author's imagination? If Churchill really did know the target of the Moonlight Sonata raid, then his decision to keep it quiet had devastating consequences.
I was shocked because it was so widespread. In Hertford Street, there was all holes and people, you know, covered with blankets, bodies, and stuff was falling. We lost quite a number of friends, and some of them, they never found the bodies, they were just blown away.
More than 500 people were killed, and for Jean, the rumours that Churchill could have prevented it are still troubling.
There is a feeling in the town that we were sacrificed, and it would be nice to have an answer to sort of close that chapter one way or the other.
So should these rumours about Churchill be taken seriously? Did the German codes tell him Coventry was going to get bombed? Not according to Bletchley Park.
Bletchley had decoded a number of messages clearly indicating a major raid was going to happen in the near future, and the assumption was that it was going to be either Birmingham, Coventry or London, but they didn't have enough information to establish which one.
But even if Simon is right, Churchill's not in the clear just yet. That's because there were other ways to predict German bombing raids. The British knew that the Germans used radio beams to direct their bombers to their targets. At 3 o'clock on November the 14th, the RAF detected these beams crossing in the skies over Coventry. They knew then that the city was the target of Moonlight Sonata. So surely, at that point, the message would have got to Coventry to expect a major raid, but it didn't.
No specific warning came through to Coventry to expect anything out of the ordinary. There was no prior warning other than the warning that the radar system would have picked up, and that would have been no more than perhaps half an hour's worth of warning. The preparations were therefore nothing unusual.
So why was there no warning? Was this a calculated decision by Churchill, or was it just too late to act?
It's very much the case it was too late to act. There is very little in the way of preventative measures that could have been taken.
Even so, it seems strange that the news of the radio beams pinpointing Coventry never reached the city. But then again, it's not entirely clear whether the message reached Churchill either, and his own actions later that day are puzzling. So that afternoon after lunch, Churchill headed into Oxfordshire. He was going to have a night in the country. Just before he left, he was handed a box containing the latest intelligence. And when he opened it, he reacted immediately. He turned to his secretary and said, "There's going to be a raid on London. We're going back." The Prime Minister made no mention of Coventry. and he headed for a familiar rooftop to watch the events unfold. That night Churchill came to this, the roof of the Air Ministry. He wanted to watch the bombs fall on London that night. Instead they fell on Coventry, more than 80 miles north of here. On the face of it, it looks like Churchill hadn't been kept in the loop. But was his behaviour all that it seemed? Coventry-born writer Alan Pollock thinks it was all an act, and in his play One Night in November he claims Churchill knew exactly where the bombers were heading.
The issue is not whether he knew, but why he did what he did. We know absolutely for a fact from the RAF report published 2 days after the raid that by 3 o'clock on the day the German navigation beams were intercepting over Coventry, and that the highest commands of the British establishment were put in the picture.
Alan thinks Churchill's reaction on opening his intelligence box was his own piece of theatre.
Why did Churchill say what he said to his secretary John Martin? We can never know. All I know for sure is that the information in that box could not possibly have indicated London.
But could Churchill really have been covering up what he knew? And is there any evidence that he stopped warnings about Coventry from reaching the city? We found the original intelligence reports at the National Archives, and they tell a different story. That on the morning of the raid, the intelligence chiefs wrote to Churchill clearly saying that the target was London.
We believe that the target areas will be probably in the vicinity of London, but if further information indicates Coventry, Birmingham or elsewhere, we hope to get instructions out in time.
Those instructions never reached Coventry, but even so the document suggests Churchill hadn't expected the city to be the target.
Nearly all historians would say that not only did Churchill not know that it was specifically going to be a raid on Coventry, but there is no evidence to suggest that he concealed any knowledge to that effect.
Perhaps we'll never know for sure, but I believe it's time Coventry shook up this rumour.
The older people in Coventry need to look at this and they need to say it was just the fog of war.
I think we have to acknowledge that little could have been done to save Coventry from an attack on this scale. This city was destroyed by German bombers and not by Winston Churchill.
Pete Waterman on the truth behind the wartime bombing.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is behind me are a list of quotes, and some of them are for war and some of them are against war. So what I'd like you to do is to go through those and put them into a little table like I've done behind me, but actually do it correctly. So which are the quotes that you would argue for war and which are the quotes that would argue against war? Because don't forget, when you're answering an AO2 question, which we'll be doing in a few moments, we're going to be thinking about which ones, why the just war theory could be acceptable, so you need to know what Christians might teach alternatively as well. So go through that now and do a for and against table. I'll go over those answers with you in a few moments. Okay, I hope you've paused me now because I'm about to go through those answers. Okay, so these are the answers then. So I'd like you to check yours over now and make sure that you've got those in the correct detail. You'll need to pause me. Okay, so our final activity then is to answer this exam question. It's an AO2 question. From a Christian perspective, war can never be justified. Discuss. From a Christian perspective, war can never be justified. Discuss. So, those of you that have seen my exam technique video previously, then you'll know that I am an advocate of CFARM. There is no right or wrong way with how to do an exam question. This is just a structure that which I personally find quite useful. You start with a conclusion, then do an argument for, against, a rebuttal, a third point, a third argument, and then your conclusion at the end. Remember, there's more information, illustration, evaluation, quotes, references. All of that is absolutely essential to do well. This will take you about 25 minutes or so, so please pause me and get that done, and then come back to me and we'll go through the marking of it. Okay, so hopefully now that's done. Behind me then is the marking grid. I'd like you now to have a look at said marking grid and identify the things that you need to. So the first thing you need to do is you need to identify any subject vocabulary. So words like Bible, Aquinas, Justin Bello, Just Ad Bellum, and all the rest of that. So go through and highlight or underline any terms that you've used. Okay, so when you've done that, that will give you an indication of what level band your answer is, because you can see there it's got some attempt at subject vocab, reasonable use, good use, or precise use. So that's an indication of your band. The next thing that you need to do is to identify scholars or schools of thought. So where have you got your evidence? That could also be Bible quotes. Okay, so if you look at a level 2 boundary, it says presentation of a point of view with some supporting evidence and argument. So if you have no evidence, you cannot be getting a level 2. It's as simple as that. Maybe that needs to be your even better if. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do is to identify what sort of evaluation have you got in there. Remember, this is all about, this is a strong argument because, this is a weak argument because, this is all to do with the evaluation and the comment that you've got rather than just the information. Remember, imagine that you are highlighting in 2 different colours as we've done before, and you highlight those points that are information and those points that are evaluation. You need at least 60% of it to be evaluation. So go through now and just identify what is evaluation. Okay, so if you've done that, then you're going to be able to make some sort of judgment on what grade boundary you have got, because it's either an evaluation is made that's consistent with some reasoning, there's an appropriate evaluation supported by reasoning, or there's an appropriate evaluation fully supported by the reasoning. Okay, so that's really the last thing. So give yourself a grade now, or a band and a grade, and set yourself an even better if. And please send that through to your teacher for us to look at as well. Okay, so just to conclude then, today then we've explored if Aquinas' just war theory can really justify war, and that's been part of our essay there. We said it's good if you could retell what the just war theory is using correct terms. Great if we could explain how it helps the Christian decide on whether war is acceptable or not, and that's where we did our for and against. And even better if we can evaluate if the just war theory is actually effective or not. So that's what we've covered today. We've covered a lot. I told you it would be a bumper episode. But thanks very much for sticking with it. You know you will have found that really useful. And remember, there's always copious amounts more reading that you can do on the Just War Theory online dead easily. So thanks for your time today. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Wash hands. And God bless. And hopefully I'll see you soon.